Okay, hello everyone. I hope that you really enjoyed my miming right there. I apologize. I had my microphone turned off, but it is now on. So here we go. Anyway, I'm just going to scoot back a little bit and redo that fantastic spiel that I just did, which none of you could hear. So sorry about that. You'll have to forgive me. This is jumping back into the first episode of our regular programming, and I was a little bit rusty. Still no excuse. Anyhow, my name is Justin Beck, and I am a teacher at 343 Labs, and this is 343 TV. And we are a music production school based in New York City and Berlin, and we also offer online classes. And what this is, 343 TV, is kind of our free educational online experience via YouTube and Twitch and anywhere else that you can live stream. And what we do is each week we are offering live streams from instructors at the school, myself, of course, included, covering different ranges of topics pertaining to electronic music and just contemporary music production in general. So what this show is about is it's called Electronic Music Essentials, right? Electronic Essentials. And essentially each week on Wednesdays at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, I'm going to be covering topics that I think are really kind of like quintessential and important to electronic music production. Things that at the end of the stream, hopefully you will have walked away a better producer, a more knowledgeable producer or artist. And so I already recognize a number of people here in the stream. And it's really, really cool to see some of you back. And I also see some new faces that I don't recognize. So I'm really pumped about that. We've been building a great, great community here at 343 Labs and at 343 TV. And I hope to continue doing that with you guys and some of the people that will be joining us, hopefully, in a little bit. Anyway, so one thing real quick. If you're not subscribed to our channel, you should definitely subscribe. We have a lot of amazing content, not just live streams. We also have tutorials and educational videos on there. And I would also highly encourage you to jump on to 343labs.com to check out the classes that we offer. And, of course, I teach some of those classes. And we offer classes in everything you can imagine: Logic, Ableton, mixing, mastering, sound design, composition, vocal production, you name it. Anyhow, without any further ado, let's hop right in. So today I am going to be talking about distortion plugins. And this is one of my absolute favorite topics in terms of like plugins that I plug in, subsets, if you want to call them that, right? Distortion is sort of a mysterious plugin because a lot of the times I think people only think about it in the context of like, you know, Jimi Hendrix or electric guitars and stuff like that, right? Or like hard rock. But distortion has a ton of applications that are super, super useful. And so what I'm going to be doing today is I'm going to be walking through a little bit of like what those applications and uses are, what I like to use distortion for, and then therein which plugins I like to go to. And I'm actually going to be comparing plugins. And so for the next 4 episodes, this one included, I'm basically going to be doing these plugin comparisons where I'm going to be doing distortion this week, compression the week after, reverb the week after, and then probably EQ after that, where I'm just going to walk through some of those popular plugins on the market and maybe some ones that you haven't heard of. And I'm going to talk about what makes them good, what I like to use them for, and also maybe what makes them not so good. So without any further ado, let's jump right in. All right. So I have a mix here, or session, whatever you want to call it, opened up. And this is one of my own tracks that I have released. It's called Can't You Feel It? And the reason that I'm going to be using this session today is because it's a track that leans a little bit more towards like psychedelic rock, organic sound, but also has some electronic elements to it. And it's a good place to sort of be able to explore what distortion is. And I also have some natural analog distortion flowing through here that we're going to listen to so that you can kind of hear what some of these plugins are trying to emulate. All right, so the 3 plugins that I'm going to be focusing on initially, but I'm going to go way, way deeper, is the Universal Audio Thermionic Vulture, the Soundtoys Decapitator, and the positive grid tube compressor. Now, you might think to yourself, why would you be covering a compressor in a distortion talk? And, well, you'll see why. All right, so I'm just going to quickly give you a brief listen for the track so you at least hear what we're getting into. Now, the thing with distortion, right, is I'm not only talking about distortion and Simple Sam. Hello, by the way, Sam. Just talked about this. I'm also talking about saturation, right? And there's a fine line between saturation and distortion, right? With saturation, it's also called harmonic distortion, right? Which is just a subtle kind of excitement of the frequencies. And while I'm at it, let me just say hello to everyone who's here. DN, what's going on? Max Wild, our fearless leader, what's going on, man? Virtually Jay. Rashane McBean, I of course know you very well. Antoine, welcome. And Vasilis, welcome. Cool, and that's what we got on here right now. Hopefully we'll hear some more folks. Anyway, so this is the track. Now, if you look into some of my labeling here, right, you notice I have this one track labeled Fuzz Distortion. So let's just go ahead and open that up real quick. Now, one thing I should mention first here is that this is a live recorded guitar from an amplifier recorded with a microphone through a preamp. So the distortion that you're hearing is actually coming from overdriving the preamp, as opposed to like a distortion pedal or plugin. So I'm going to skip ahead a little so you can hear the distortion a bit more. So you can hear it kind of sizzling on top a little. Right there, really hear it. So one thing that I'm going to do here, first of all, I'm actually just going to save this as a new project alternative so I don't mess anything up. So one really cool thing about Logic, if you're not familiar, is you can save session alternatives, where basically I can have infinite different variations of the session that I'm working on, and if I mess one up, I can just go back and work on the old one. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this note right here, which has some nice meaty kind of fuzz distortion, right, as I named it. Now I'm going to go right there, and that's a pretty clean tone. So I'm going to cut this one up. What I'm going to do is I'm going to drag this onto this track. And then we are going to start messing with some of these plugins. Now, I'm not going to change any of the processing on here. Nothing really serious. I literally just have a high-pass filter and a bit of a cut, I guess, at 3,000. Oh, no, sorry. A bit of a cut at 10,000. And so what I'll do is I'm going to start putting these plugins on here. And first off, I'm going to compare them to the fuzz distortion. Not because they're supposed to sound the same, but I just want to compare what natural analog distortion sounds like compared to digital distortion. All right, so that's our analog distorted tone. Now let's go ahead and start with the universal audio with the Thermionic Vulture. This plugin is crazy. First off, it has a beautiful interface. Right? When I'm not gonna lie, I am like attracted to things like that. I like when the plugin looks exciting to work with. I know this isn't a plugin review per se, but I will just point that out. Now, when you put on the Vulture, nothing really changes immediately. It doesn't necessarily alter the sound drastically right away. Let's try it. Let's turn this guy off. There we go. All right. So within the plugin, right? One thing that I really like about this plugin actually is that it creates latency, which most plugins do, by the way. So when you turn a plugin on and off, right? Sometimes you'll hear a little kind of like stutter, right? That's because there's latency compensation happening. Now, all of the universal audio plugins have a lot of latency when you turn them on. They don't actually do latency compensation very well when you turn it on and off. Like, it's going to pause for a sec, be out of time with your project, and then float back in, like, sometimes 3 seconds later. So one thing I like about this plugin in terms of even just being in the universal audio universe is that it has an on and off function that bypasses all the processing and all the effects of the plugin on it, right? So I don't have to turn it on and off if I want to A/B things. Now, when I turn it on, it sounds like there's this ever so slightly little touch of saturation in like the low mids. But it's nothing that's like super noticeable. One other thing is that I know usually the sound pinches a little bit on this plugin, which is not necessarily the greatest thing, but the sound that you get from it's just awesome. So I'd say that we can forgive that. So anyway, let's go ahead and just use this thing. Very, very simple controls. You have your left and your right, but I'm going to have the channels linked. And especially because it's muted, it's in mono right now. It doesn't matter. The channels are automatically linked. So I'm going to go ahead and just turn up the drive. Now you'll notice that it gets way louder when I do that. We're starting to get some of that distortion in there. Sounding pretty nice. Now, I'm going to turn on the output level, right, to gain stage. Now, something that's so important, right, when you're producing and you're adding effects that drastically alter the sound is to what's called gain stage, right? And gain staging is very simply where you make sure that the volume of the source doesn't change once you turn the plugin on and off. So this is getting a lot louder. Which, every once in a while, so while I get that fixed, I'm going to jump back just to me. And that's very unfortunate. So let's go ahead and open up the project again. In the meantime, what's going on? Wislow production. Welcome in, man. Here we go. Just waiting for my Logic session to open. Here we go. We're back. And let's see. Where's my project alternative? 343 session. Oh, I'm in it already. Okay. Now, where's the stuff that we soloed? Over here. Okay, that's great. It didn't save what we were doing. That's annoying. That's okay, though. Let's quickly jump back in here. Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and get that culture vulture back on there. On, off. And so we were cranking it, right? And gain staging. Yeah, that is normal for UAD. It has tons of latency. Still really loud. Still a bit loud. Alright, so let's really crank the drive. Now, one thing that's cool about this plugin, right, is it has this bias knob, which basically affects how the tubes, quote unquote, are behaving. So the higher you turn the bias, the less aggressive distortion you get, basically. Alright, so we can hear that nice little bit of saturation on top there, a little bit of distortion. Now, it's not quite as... What's a little different sounding? So let's get those. Still very subtle, this distortion, right? So this is more the saturation setting. Now, if we change this to... This is just T. We're going to change this to P1. You're going to notice we're going to get a super new distortion characteristic. A lot of distortion, right? So the way this thing works is you have these 3 settings. Now when I change this bias knob down, right, I get a nice, really fat distortion. Now if we compare that again over here, right, it actually sounds quite similar. The distortion is maybe a little more aggressive over here, so let's turn the bias up. We can almost actually match that distortion to a T, which is impressive. And again, that's analog distortion, totally natural. So there are different characteristics, right? This one is a little bit pinched at the top. A little bit fuzzier with those gristles. But this one definitely sounds very good. We really just slam it. Pretty close. So that's pretty cool, right? Now, it's not a matter of better or worse. Those are just different. So this distortion sounds great on guitars. Now, if we go to P2... This is the most aggressive distortion type. Or maybe not. Maybe I've forgotten. There we go. So basically, you got to adjust the tube bias on this thing to make it sing. That's what's one really fun thing about this plugin, is that you actually have quite a bit of control in terms of how you sculpt it. So this plugin sounds really good overall. Now this is just guitar, right? Let's go ahead and flick one of my favorite switches on this plugin, which is the overdrive knob, and you will notice something that will happen. Full system overload. So we just completely shit it out. It was too aggressive. So that's a really, really intense distortion. Now let me explain to you what is good and bad about this distortion. First, let me cycle in between modes. P1 on overdrive sounds insane. Really rich and gristly. Now if we want to get a little more of that analog style sizzle like the overdrive on the preamp, By turning the bias down and the overdrive on, we can even adjust the mix knob. And we get a pretty decent approximation of that analog fuzz tone. That mix knob is not really too useful, is it? So that's pretty nice. Now let's go ahead and compare that with Soundtoys. So we've got a decent understanding of what that plugin is doing, right, on this sound. So let's go ahead and throw on Soundtoys Decapitator. Right, so of course these two plugins look very different. This is based on a tube unit, right? The Vulture, whereas the fuzz distortion, the Soundtoys Decapitator is based on different analog circuits. Now, I honestly forget what all of these circuits are. If you look them up, though, they come right up. Like, you can know about it. All I know is N is Neve, I believe. And I think A is API and E is EMI. Or it's just two different styles of Neve. I honestly don't remember. But it doesn't really matter what the emulations are. I'm going to be perfectly honest with you. None of the emulations that exist actually sound like the real physical box. They're like approximations, you know? It's like someone describing the color red to you. You know, you can get there, but until you see the thing and feel it and understand it, it's not the same thing. Doesn't mean it's not useful. It's just different, right? Like, I'm not going to shoot out necessarily a 1073 preamp against a unison, a universal audio unison preamp. I would shoot it out to see if they're, if it really is a good emulation. But after that, then I just want to understand what is useful about that plugin itself, right? So the idea of like choosing plugins based on how accurate the emulations are, I think is ridiculous. They all just sound different and they all have their different uses. So whether or not any of these emulations are accurate doesn't really matter to me. What matters to me is if it sounds good, right? So I'm just going to be totally honest with you. I don't like this plugin. I think it sounds really fake. But maybe we'll find out that I'm wrong right now. So let's go ahead and crank this guy. Now, I will say, one of my favorite things about this plugin, even though I don't like it very much, is this manual gain stage adjustment. This is so useful. You put it on auto, and basically what it does is it stages the output so that the amount of gain that you get doesn't make it too loud. So this makes it really easy to turn it on and off. But as you can hear, there's that little stutter. So I can also hear that even though the auto is working, it's still getting too loud. So the way that I'm going to compare these is by turning the mix knob, actually. So we're getting a ton of gain to the point that, you can... Here, let's just turn this up so you guys can all hear it. This is our dry signal and our wet signal. So now if we compare, which is very distorted, right? And this is on overdrive nonetheless. We compare that to sound very, very, very similar, right? It's actually pretty impressive. Yeah, I mean, quite honestly, just from A-Bing those, there isn't that much of a meaningful difference, I would say. The real only thing I could point to would be this subtle thing that's a little bit hard to hear, which is what happens from about 2000 and above, where the Soundtoys sounds a little boxy. It really sounds like a square wave in a digital way, where there aren't a lot of dynamics there. It sounds like it's kind of almost hitting a limiter. Now, that's what distortion is, mind you. Distortion in the analog realm is essentially when you exceed an output limit. What starts to happen is, again, output limit, right? The sound crushes into that ceiling. Now, it's not a literal ceiling like set with a threshold. It's a ceiling just in terms of like the maximum voltage it can output, right? What starts to happen is the sound starts to crunch and crunch and crunch and crunch into that ceiling, akin to hitting a limiter, quite frankly. And so right here, now one thing to notice is that, quite frankly, almost every single distortion plugin is going to sound really sweet on this guitar because it's a clean, really, nicely recorded guitar tone that already has some kind of harmonics in it, right? So one thing that you can hear now is, if you compare them, is that the Soundtoys is decidedly brighter sounding. And I know we're only on the first setting, so we'll go through the settings. But just comparing these, right? The Soundtoys is much brighter. And you shouldn't mistake brightness for clarity. That's not what's going on. I would argue that the Soundtoys is actually harsher. Now, one thing to keep in mind, right, is that with both of these plugins, you can kind of push them into overdrive. Even though I have really driven this super hard, I haven't actually put on the really intense overdrive yet. And I have put on the intense overdrive on the Vulture. So it is a bit of an unfair comparison, but it also goes to show you that you can get to very similar tones with different settings, right? You don't have to use every distortion plugin or every plugin for that matter the same way. So there's this little thing going on, I would say. Let's find it, like up around here. Yeah, right around there. And also there. Okay, that's really what I'm looking for. So this kind of 5,000 area. Now if I just copy that and add it to this, to the Thermionic Vulture channel, what you'll notice is it doesn't sound nice either, but it's less resonant. There's a little bit more. Let's push even harder on both of these. Now I'm purposely trying to bring out the harshness here, so that we can hear what's actually going on. So what I would say is that the Vulture is a little bit more concentrated in those overtones and a little less clear though also. So I do think that this is this is not supposed to happen. Hold on. Now, bear in mind, there's no actually perfect way to compare these, right? Kind of similar, I would say. Almost exactly the same. The main difference here being, right, is that sharpness way up high. So one reason for that could be that we have it set to A. And A is a solid state distortion. Now, what do I mean by that? Okay, well, there's two types of distortions, really, that these distortions are modeled off of. And that is solid state components, being transistors, capacitors, transformers, things like that. And then you have tubes, right? And tube stuff distorts differently than solid state stuff. In fact, every single different combination or different type of component is going to distort a little bit differently. So let's actually, to that end, go through the Soundtoys and listen to how that distortion is functioning. I like that one a lot more. E sounds really nice. Now, why do I like it more? Okay, let's get into that. A is just kind of a fat, round tone, which is nice. We like fat, round tones, but it literally takes up more space. It's adding more harmonics. It's making the sound less defined. Now, when I go to E, I get this pinch. Now, I will say that pinch so far is the most similar to this. That sounds very similar to my ear. This is a little more distorted, so let's roll it back. Try to get that nice little pinch on top. My interface bugged out again there. Okay. So let's reopen that project. Man, I'm gonna have to like factory reset this thing. Really annoying how that happens. So sorry about that. Now, while we're waiting for the project to reopen, there's a couple things that maybe I could explain about what it is that I'm looking for. I'm using distortion, right? And once we go back and open up the project, I am going to apply this distortion in a more kind of non-traditional way to some drums and see what that does. And then we can really start to hear some of these differences. One of the main ways to test distortion is to push it to its absolute limits, because that allows you to hear what it's really doing. All right, so that was E. Now we have N, which is the smoothest sounding one so far. That's the most analog sounding. That's pretty sweet and warm. Now T, we barely get any distortion, which is nice. So that's really just a saturation effect. Then P. That's my least favorite one. That sounds harsh. Yeah, I can hear the square waves kind of poking out a little bit too much. Now let's put Punish on and see what happens. That's cool. Very cool. Okay, so my guess is that E is based on a my guess is that E is based on a tube unit. That sounds a little bit more like tube distortion, although has harshness in the high frequencies. Okay, so we're starting to get to where it sounds really, really digital. T is clearly the most subtle circuit. So to my ear, the most... Hearing no DAW at all. Ah. Sorry about that. So let's go back to A. So there we go. So we are cranking this as much as possible. That's a pretty cool sounding distortion. So as I was saying, E sounds the most kind of the most analog in the sense that it's the most non-linear, right? So when I say non-linear, what I mean is that it's not the volume. There are actual drops and inconsistencies in the volume. That actually is how analog distortion works. Is that there's going to be these sudden little thresholds where when you get above them, the distortion just increases or decreases the overtones. Yeah, so the EMI one sounds really good. Now this is decidedly harsh in my opinion. There's some really unpleasant shit happening up top. All that stuff sounds really not nice. So E, not that it's the most lovely. That one sounds the least awful. Now I'm purposely boosting all of the highs so you can really hear what's happening in the high frequencies. Now this one actually probably, if I wanted to get an analog saturation, analog distortion, I would actually go for this one because it's the weakest. So I could probably boost it with a sort of analog styled EQ. Oh, that's cool. T is based on the triode setting. Yeah, so that actually makes sense. So we heard that that would be the triode setting, right? I'm sure these sound literally nothing alike. Not to say that this is the actual real version, right? But if we turn it on to punish mode for all intents and purposes, let's see. All right, so this is actually perfect. So the more and more that I was listening, the more that I really am starting to understand why it is that I prefer the Culture Vulture. So with analog distortion, let's jump back over to our fuzz. Let's see if we can find some more. All right. So in this area, there's this sizzle on top of the guitar, right? Now that is like the fundamental characteristic of analog distortion, really, is that there's this high frequency sizzling. The distortion extends into the high frequencies. Like really high. Now what's cool right about that stroke That distortion sort of surges out of it. Thank you, Nefertiti. I appreciate that. And what's going on? So let's listen now to that distortion from the Culture Vulture. Way over the top. So, whoa, what happened? All right, let's turn up the bias. And turn down the drive. So what I'm trying to do is get to that sizzle that we have from the analog. Now it's hard to get there. Neither of these plugins really fully achieve it in a satisfying way, in my opinion. Now, of course, you should not always just be slamming these. Using them subtly also sounds really nice. That sounds like it's getting us closer. Those seem very similar. So that's starting to sort of teeter on the edge of what I'd be looking for. Very close. So you can make what you want of that plugin. I think, like I was saying, everything's going to sound good on guitar because it just responds so nicely to distortion. So let's try one more. Now, this one is a weird one. This one is called the Positive Grid Tube Compressor. Now, this is one of my favorite plugins that I own. I'd say top 5 favorite plugins. Not because it's great at compression, but because it's actually weirdly great at distortion. And so what this does is it allows you to actually model the different gain stages of an analog compressor. And with analog components, you have these different types of tubes. Now, to the best of my knowledge, I believe that the Culture Vulture uses and is emulating 12AX7 tubes. Yeah, and that's a good point, Owaslow. You know, they're like, when it comes to distortion, I think more than anything, I don't think digital is there yet. Like, I don't think it quite sounds like analog. And I will say that as I pull up a plugin that, in my opinion, is the closest thing you can get to analog distortion in the digital domain, from my experience. Maybe there's another one I don't know about. Now, here's the thing with this plugin. This is not designed to be a distortion plugin. It just happens to distort gloriously. And really, I use it more, you might say, saturate, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of turn all of these things on and mess with them a little bit. Very first thing I'll do is I won't adjust anything. I'll just crank the input stage. Now, one thing that sucks about this plugin, and I really mean that, is it thins the sound out significantly when you turn it on. We really lose all that low-mid roundness. So that sucks. Now, that being said, you turn up the bias, and that changes a little. Now, there's one thing I want to actually point out. Literally, just by turning this up and turning the bias up, I'm starting to get some of that sizzle on top that I recognize from the analog distortion. I want you to notice that. You're getting a little bit of that sizzle. It's a little bit of a slightly distinctive, different crunch than we're getting from the Decapitator and the Culture Vulture. By the way, this plugin's like $99. I think it's even cheaper sometimes. Now, part of the way this thing works is I'm first hitting the tubes, and then I have this output stage too, which is also going to hit some tubes, but I haven't turned those on, and also will hit this transformer. So the fact that I'm turning up the output gain is actually already adding saturation. The real place I'm going to hear saturation, though, is going to be right here on the input gain. And there you go. I basically rest my case. I mean, that sounds so fucking good. That's essentially the same thing. Even nicer. I would argue that the distortion that I'm getting from this plugin is nicer than the actual distortion there. Let's turn maybe the bias down a little bit and see what we can get. Those sound mighty similar. Wow. Crank the input a little bit more. Now if I want to maybe really accent that distortion, turn on the output stage of for the tube. Yeah, jeez, that sounds so sweet. Woo! Woo! Yeah, Owizlo, a lot of their plugins are really, really fire. Just a couple things that you should know about them. You cannot automate them, which is mind-bogglingly frustrating. And they don't have compare. Like, once you adjust it, it won't go back. You might ask, why is that for something that sounds so good? The honest to God answer is that these plugins, this is not a plugin company that actually makes studio plugins. What they do is they make guitar emulations for amps. And so they just really have modeled how tubes behave like really well. And they apply that tube modeling into a tube compressor plugin, and voila, you have the best tube compressor emulation that exists, in my opinion. I haven't tried Spectre from Waves Factory. I'm super down to, though. So this is just like gorgeous every day of the week. Now let's play with it. There are a lot of really cool things you can do with this plugin. First of all, I can change the tube stages. Oh, that's so sweet, man. That's like eargasmic. That sounds a lot like this. Now if I turned off the let's get a little more of those low frequencies back in there. This is the third time this has happened now with these plugins. And I cannot blame the plugins. I definitely don't blame the plugins. I blame my interface, which keeps peaking. Yeah, the True Iron is awesome. True Iron sounds really good. I'll pull that up in a second. Yeah, the guitar distortion sounds awesome on synth. Dash Rendar. All right, and we're back. Oh yeah, the other thing that sucks about this plugin, I don't want to just blindly sing its praises without telling you, you know, the bad things. When you adjust the output gain, it doesn't stay adjusted. So the second I close the plugin, it goes back to where it is. And you can't reset the values. So it's like not a good contemporary plugin, but the sound is glorious. So I'm just going to use this gain model, gain utility. That's the most similar sounding one by far so far. So let me put on the aluminum mode. Hit the input a little bit harder, maybe put on the AX7, drive the output. Let's try the mica. These sound really similar. Now, the object here is not to get perfect emulations of that distortion, but it's worth understanding. The tube EQ sounds really good, actually. It's just a Pultec emulation, the positive grid one. And I actually love this thing. I use it all the time. I just use it less and less these days because it can't be automated. And I also happen to like the acoustic EQ Pultec a little bit more. But that one is awesome, man. Anyway, so I only got like 10, 15 minutes left here. So let's move away from this distortion, this guitar distortion. And let's go explore some other fun things that we can distort. So let's first go to a kick drum. Kick drums are fun to distort. So let's go ahead and start out, actually, why not, with the tube compressor. So as you can hear, like I was saying, it takes out some of the low frequencies. Really, all the important ones. And the problem is to get them back, the noise floor comes up big time, which is not cool. So I probably wouldn't reach for this on a kick. What I will say, though, is I use this in parallel on kicks all the time. In fact, oh no, it's not there. Okay. Yeah, I use this for parallel compression saturation just to actually answer your question, Stranger Ting. I literally would use this in parallel, slam it, get it a really tight, sharp transient with some nice harmonic distortion in the low mids, and I would blend that in. That's what I would use. I wouldn't use distortion directly on a kick drum in techno. You would smear the transient too much. You take away the power. Anyway, let's hit this thing super hard. Now, this is raising the noise floor in a really uncool way. So, I'm going to put a gate on. I really like these gates from Slate. Now I still get that noise, but we can focus a little bit more just on the sound itself. That's nice. So changing the tube setting sounds really nice. Now this is interesting. The AU creates real transient breakup. This is rare to find in plugins. So you hear the transients almost doubling. Like there's a little mini delay on top. Where there it's sharp and punchy. That actually sounds really, really nice. This one, the AT7. Wow. Now basically the way these work is this is the most harmonic, this is the brightest, and this is the darkest. So this sounds like really, really nice. And if we adjust the mix knob, you don't have to check the phase because the DAW auto compensates for any phase delay issues when you use sends and returns. So we can change the output stage here. Ooh, that's nice. A little bit more, way more aggressive, actually. Wow. That's really interesting. All right, so that's really forward and sweet sounding and colorful. The thing that I like about this is it sounds the most, it just sounds the most analog. I just like, when I use it, I'm like, oh yeah, this is what it feels like to slam things through gear. Now, let's go ahead and compare this with, let's just start with Soundtoys. Why not? Wait, oops. All right. So let's slam this kick through the Soundtoys Decapitator. I'll tell you what, there was just a lot of noise in the kick to begin with, so that's what we were hearing. I guess it's not that plugin's fault. All right. It's a little much. Okay, so here's why this plugin sucks. This is a really, really bad imitation of like the transient breakup of like what happens when the transient smushes apart. Okay. So this is the only like gentle saturation we've encountered so far. Right, so I was cranking it into the positive grid one, and I was getting a much friendlier, rounder, and warmer version of distortion. The main thing that I just don't like about this is when you push it really hard, it just stops sounding pleasant. That's the only way I can describe it. It just doesn't sound nice. That's okay. I kind of like that one, actually. That's cool. So I guess if you trim the dark knob down a little bit and turn on the thump, you get kind of a nice sound. There's a little bit more. So that harshness on top. I mean, you can encounter harshness like that in the analog realm for sure, but it's just like lacks an equivalent like kind of high frequency harmonic to make it less resonant. I like. Okay, so let's hold on a sec. I like how snappy this is making it. Okay, we are getting somewhere. All right, so I have a Heritage Audio EQ and preamp, which emulates Neve, right? So I can't say I'm comparing it to a real Neve, but it does. I've heard real Neves. I've worked with real Neves, and I can say it works. Sounds a lot like it. And this is kind of what Neves sound like when you push them hard. Oh, now here's something I didn't understand about this plugin. Okay, this is useful. This is actually cool. Right, so with the Decapitator, if I'm going to be using this for my personal taste, right, is I'd probably be using this in parallel to get some of the snap and harshness that it brings and blending that into something that doesn't have any bite. I would hesitate to use this as the main sound design tool on something. I think it just is going to not make it sound lovely, but that doesn't mean that you can't make it sound good. All right? So let's also compare this now to the Culture Vulture. That doesn't sound awful, I have to say. That doesn't sound awful. It also doesn't sound lovely. It's just a little harsh sounding. That's all it is. The only way I can explain it. So this is truly sweet sounding. And I must say, so far, by far the friendliest and warmest. And you compare it to the, I mean, obviously it's not a fair comparison. See, this retains the Culture Vulture retains the snap and the weight. Much more seamlessly. What I would argue is smoother. And it's just more up front. It just has that bite in a good way. So I am much, especially in this particular case, much more digging the Culture Vulture. So let's now check the next really intense version of it. Right? So that brings us closer to the Decapitator sound. But even so, it's still, it has a sweetness to it that it's hard to explain, but you can hear it, right? That sweetness that the Soundtoys just doesn't have. Okay, that sounds nice. That sounds pretty good, I must say. Let's try to really hit it now. Ooh, I like that. That's nice. But here's the thing. I have to destroy the transient on the Soundtoys one to get the warmth in the bottom, whereas the Culture Vulture actually maintains the integrity of the transient, which is impressive. I didn't even think it would do that. Like, in my mind, it's literally night and day. Like, this just sounds so much more expensive, the Culture Vulture. And you have the option of getting to that aggressive sound. Whereas it seems like the Soundtoys is always kind of managing that aggressiveness as opposed to easing into it. So, I don't know. And then if I put on the overdrive, don't love it. Not going to lie. Although that gives us a very Soundtoysy type vibe. Similar. Okay, now let's check this out. Ooh, I like this. So what I like about this really is actually emulating what happens with the preamp when you hit it too hard, where literally you can reach a point where you just lose the volume. It distorts so hard that it just stops making noise. So that happens with my preamps, but they just sound nicer when that happens. So now they sound similar. Anyhow, that's kind of, I would say, 6 to 1, half a dozen the other, whatever you really want. It's up to your flavor. We compare that, though, to the tube compressor. Doesn't seem like we can physically achieve that level of distortion. No. So that's okay. So, again, this is more of a saturation plugin than a distortion plugin, to be fair. But in comparing these two, right, I would say that more often than not, the Vulture is going to get you a more realistic sound than the Soundtoys. But if you want something that sounds contemporary, right, and that really fits in with other music coming out, in terms of the contemporary style of really slappy distortion, then I would probably reach for the Soundtoys. It just depends, At the end of the day, I don't think you're going to make bad sounding music with the Soundtoys. Although, and of course, the thing about it we have to mention, right, is that you don't have to buy a universal audio interface to use it. So that's something that's pretty annoying about the Vulture. It's literally it's over, it's like $600-700 just to get it, on the basis of you need to get something that can actually use it, and then you have to pay for it itself, right? Because it doesn't come with the stuff. That being said, I do think it's more versatile. I do think it gives you more realistic and a greater variation of tones, where I think that the Soundtoys really only has 2 kind of modes. It has like the gentle mode, and then it has the really like aggressive mode. It's very harsh and sharp sounding. If you're trying to make extra snappy stuff, you could probably EQ around it to make it sound a little nice. But the thing is that I personally do not like to EQ out the characteristics of something, And the whole point of distortion is that it has kind of nice characteristics that you want to keep. Now, with all that being said, right, that doesn't mean you can't do the EQ stuff. You totally can. So that is, unfortunately, all the time I have for today. I actually have to run over to the school here in New York City and teach a class. So I'm going to go ahead and sign off. But it was really fun having you guys on. And thanks for everyone for interacting in the chat. There's going to be a lot more content to come. Tomorrow we have Abe Duke. I'm going to be doing the exact same thing, but I'll be comparing compression plugins. So that should get pretty heated. Let's just put it that way. Anyway, that is all the time that I have for today. If you dug the content and you're not subscribed yet to 343 TV, please hit the subscribe button. We got lots of great content coming for you. And as mentioned, 343 TV is the extension of 343 Labs, music production school based in New York, Berlin, and online. If you're interested in taking classes and want to level up your production game, go ahead and go to 343labs.com. All right. That is all the time I have for today. I'll catch you guys next week. Keep it real.